You're listening to Being Autistic. I'm your host, Shelly, and I am a 50-year-old woman sharing my experiences about what it's like to grow up knowing I was different but not knowing why, how I learned I was on the autism spectrum, and what it's like to be autistic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 7. This is going to be all about work struggles. So I'm making this episode pretty early on in this podcast because it's such a big topic for me and many other autistic people, because there's a statistic out there that 80% of autistic adults are unemployed. And I'm not quite sure if that's worldwide, but I've heard it from a couple different countries. And I'm also not quite sure when. I'm pretty sure it's like a recent statistic, because that's like the only number I've heard since doing my research. And I believe it because I talk to a lot of autistic people, and many of them say that they have struggled with work. They're either not working, they're on disability, or they are working only part-time. So there's like a lot of different variations to it, but basically there's not a whole lot of autistic people that work full-time and, like have stayed at the same job their whole lives. It's just not, unless it's like the perfect job, which is like hard to find. But basically this is a big topic, and it's been, frankly, the worst struggle of my life when it comes to autistic traits. Just like if I had to pick any one thing that being autistic has made worse in my life, it's been the issue of work. Of course, relationships and friendships are, like, social issues are another big struggle, but those aren't going to affect people's lives as much as not being able to work. Everybody needs money, so that's become the biggest issue for that reason, because it's almost like we're forced to comply to the way that the world works. So first I want to say that this was the way that the world is right now when it comes to society. Wasn't not like this before. This is only a modern thing from the last couple hundred years. Thanks to the industrial age. There's a lot of unknown information out there that a lot of people don't know about that basically made it so that we all had to work 40 hours a week. It was not always like that. And it was also not always where people had to choose a job outside of their home that wasn't really, it wasn't really helping them survive other than the money part of it. So back in the old days, like I'm talking centuries ago, people would live in villages. People would have trades, like men would usually be carpenters or doctors or things like that, and women would make, they would cook food, they would grow food, they would heal people, like with herbs and things like that. And so this is how people survived. That was their job, was to, plant food and harvest it and make clothing for their families. They didn't need to leave their house to go to a job. And so I think that would be a better way to live. In so many ways, it's also more sustainable, because if there would be no such thing as an economy, really, because nobody's really shopping, or there's not such a thing as corporations. There's just your family and your resources in your environment. So getting to the point of what I'm trying to get at here is the world today is not set up in that way, obviously, and it's detrimental to our health, because back in them days there was no such thing as like somebody having to create a resume and go for job interviews and commute for a half an hour or an hour to get to work, punching in, not having access to your home or your phone. Like you're kind of a prisoner at work for that 8 hours, sometimes even more. And like parents couldn't be with their children for that whole time. People were just forced to do something they didn't really want to do for that length of time. And you're in an environment that's not familiar to you. You have no control over the environment. So just the way that the whole work system is set up, it's not good for autistic people. And also, it's also not good for other people either. They just don't have the same issues that we do. So autistic people have sensory issues. We have issues with so many things that pertain to the work model of the way the world is. We don't do good with interviews because interviews are like a performance, you're acting a certain way to hopefully get this job. And really, it's all an act just so that you can have money to survive. And it's just a roundabout way that doesn't make sense to us. And let me think of some more things. I didn't write any notes for this. I like to freestyle it because I don't, kind of what I just said is I don't like to act. So I feel like having a script is just being like a robot, like I'm pretending to say this, but really I'm saying it from the heart, which is why I'm winging it here. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about my personal experiences with work, because I probably could go on and on and on for a long time about how the system is not set up for autistic people, like especially when it comes to sensory issues and all this stuff. So I talked a little bit about my issues with work in 2 of my previous episodes about being an undiagnosed autistic person in my teenage years and adulthood, because of course I had to get a job when I was 16, so that was arranged by my dad. He kind of forced me to. He also forced me to get my second job because the first job was just a part-time, lower pay thing. So my first 2 jobs were kind of chosen for me and forced upon me. At the time, I didn't want to work because I didn't feel like an adult. I didn't feel like I could handle it, and I had a lot of problems with it. My first job was McDonald's, and the first position I had there was working on the cash registers. And that was and still is one of the worst jobs for me. And I've had to do that before in other jobs since then, and it was just as bad. So it's not something that just gets better with practice. So it basically involves talking to customers, handling money and credit cards, which is not something I'm good at either. It's stress, let's just say that, because you're constantly trying to keep up with the people and make everybody happy. It's basically comes down to customer service mixed with money and transactions, and it's just horrible. I was kicked off of the cash register after about a week or 2 because I kept having to ask for help. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't handle it. And then I ended up working back in the grill area, making the food, which was better. So, not saying it was perfect because there's no perfect job, but it was better than working the cash register. So, if you're listening to this and you are trying to find a job and you are autistic, then most likely you're probably not going to do well in a cashier job. Although, there's exceptions. Some people might really like it, but I have not heard of too many. And so, after that McDonald's job, I got a job at a factory because that's where my dad and mom worked. So my dad forced me to get that job. And it was horrible for so many reasons, because it was a bright, very, very bright, fluorescent lights everywhere, loud, loud machines everywhere you turn. In fact, it was like one giant room with hundreds of machines all running at the same time. And that's pretty much how most factories are. I've had to work in other factories since then, and they're all pretty bad. So it was loud and bright and open space, which I also hate, which is something that I've heard from other autistic people too, because it's we kind of like to hide. We kind of like being in enclosed, dark, quiet spaces. It calms us down. It's kind of like a sensory thing. It's almost like the same principle as using a weighted blanket. Weighted blankets are good for autistic people because it's like comforting pressure holding you, and it's a confined space, and it's a tight space, and it's just comfortable. You cannot be comfortable in a bright, loud, open room where, as far as I can see, there's just people and machines and lights. Oh, I'm getting just stressed out thinking about it. So I did that job until they laid me off, which was actually a long time. I was there for like 18 years, I think. And part of why I stayed was because my dad made me get the job, and I didn't want to cause any conflict. I wanted to just stop going to job interviews and just be like, okay, fine, I'm just going to stay here because it was like the best option. Although it was bad for all that stuff I mentioned, it was also, more money than I ever had. I did have some time off, although it wasn't a whole lot. So I had insurance and all that good stuff. So the trade-off was worth it, although I didn't really like it while I did it, of course. I dreamed about, what else could I do? I just thought of nothing. I didn't like working at McDonald's. I didn't, just the thought of going out there to try to find another job was, it just kept me stuck at that factory job. And there was another plus about that factory job was there was so many different positions within it. It wasn't like I was doing the same thing every day. I did probably 20 to 30 different positions. And there were a couple positions there where I was able to work in a smaller area that wasn't so loud and full of people. There was even one position there where I could listen to my own music, although I don't know if I was supposed to be able to, but they didn't yell at me for it, so I just listened to my music while I was working. So, and I also made a lot of friends there, which is something that proved to be the only way that I've been good at making friends. I guess I shouldn't say that, because I have made a lot of friends in recent years through my special interest, which is music festivals. But going back to the work thing, when you're around people, the same people every day, day in and day out, for that many years, you just naturally make friends. And I'm not going to say they were all great friends. I had a lot of people there that even treated me like crap. It was like another continuation of high school, really. I even had some coworkers that bullied me. I had one that she nicknamed me Freak, and that was what she called me. She just said, "Hey, Freak," and at the time I'm like, well, but she is my friend, and now looking back, I'm like, ugh, I can't believe that an adult in their 20s would call another adult a freak. And that was just like another example of the way that people treated me. And yeah, so coworkers are not all great. You're going to get a mix of people. So there's like a spectrum of how people are at work. There's going to be the end where I made some really good friends that were nice to me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I had some acquaintances, I should probably call them, not really friends, that would call me names, laugh at me, and not when I didn't really know why. That's another theme of autism, where you're just being yourself, or you're trying to fit in, one of the two. But either way, they can tell that you're not normal, and they laugh to themselves about you, and they talk to themselves about you, and they look at you while they don't think you're not paying attention. That kind of stuff happens. So that was just another negative thing about work. So now I'm going to move on to some of the other jobs that I've had. After I got laid off from that job, I that was a turning point in my life because it was scary for one reason that I was like, now I'm in charge of my life. My dad can't force me to get another job because he still worked at the factory and I was gone. And so I was like, well, now what do I do? I can do whatever I want, but at the same time, I don't want to do anything. I spent probably 9 months after getting laid off just searching for another job and getting more and more depressed as I did it because I couldn't find anything that I didn't have much experience in anything but factory and fast food. And those are not things that people really want to do. And especially an autistic person. I didn't want to work in a busy, fast-paced, stressful restaurant. And I also didn't want to work in a loud, bright, open, stressful factory. So I took something that I thought would have worked, which was it was a job at a teenage shelter, and I was working the overnight hours, which I thought, okay, this is nice because it's going to be quiet, the kids will be sleeping, and my duties were to cook the food for them for the next day, do laundry, and do paperwork. And those things were fine. I was like okay with those. But the day that I had my first day there, I had a panic attack because I found out that I was also in charge of a couple other things that I didn't know I was going to have to do, and they just threw them at me, and I'm like, I can't do that. Nobody told me I had to do that. And one of them was driving to a big city, which was like a half an hour to 45 minutes away. And I don't drive well in big cities. And so I would have had to drive there to pick up a kid and bring them back to this place. And then I also learned that I also had to deal with the kids that would come in. The police would bring these kids in that ran away from home, and I would be the one that would have to deal with them. And I'm like, what? No. I don't have kids. I don't take care of things. I'm not responsible. I just want to do laundry and cook and do paperwork and just enjoy the silence. But that wasn't what the full job description was, and they didn't tell me those things until I started. So another thing I had to do was answer the phones there, which was another thing that I can't do very well. I've always had an issue with phones. That's been something that's been a problem for me since I was probably 10 years old. I had some issues where I was, the term is selective mutism, but I was on the phone with I'm jumping back now. This is just another thing I need to explain about the phone thing. I was on the phone with a friend, and I had to go away to ask my mom something, and when I came back, I simply could not speak. And I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know why I couldn't talk, but I learned now that that's an autism trait where you have mutism, and it's because of some stress. But at the time I was talking to my friend, so like my neighbor friend, and I'm like, there's no logical explanation for why I couldn't talk, but I just picked the phone back up and I couldn't talk. And I was sitting there listening to her talking to her mom, going, well, she went to ask her mom and something, and now she hasn't been back, and I don't know if I should hang up or not. And I just sat there and I couldn't talk. I still couldn't say anything to her. I waited for her to hang up, and then I hung up, and that was the end of that. But anyway, I also struggle with calling people. It's always been an issue for me. I struggle with needing to discuss information over the phone, especially at this job that I just had. I was supposed to answer the phone. I was supposed to call these children's parents and tell them they were in the shelter, and so not something that I wanted to do or could do. And even one time when the phone rang, I couldn't answer it. I literally just kept doing what I was doing, and I ignored the phone. And then I found out that it was a coworker that was trying to get in. she couldn't get in the door, but she ended up somehow getting in, and I got yelled at for not answering the phone. And I'm like, well, I came up with an excuse that I was cooking breakfast and I couldn't step away. I couldn't leave the kitchen to go answer the phone when I was in the kitchen cooking food. I mean, that kind of made sense to my mind at the time. They should have had this was back before there were cell phones. This was when there were recorded phones, so I couldn't just have a phone with me. Anyway, so yeah, that job didn't last long, and I quickly found another one. The next job I took was a cleaning job at a bed and breakfast, where I thought, okay, I don't have to answer the phone here. I don't have to take care of people. Oh my gosh. But that one was awful as well, because I found out that I don't like to clean. Well, I kind of knew I didn't like to clean. I've always not liked it, but this was like, I had to clean like 10 different rooms in this place. And it was just not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I also did not like the fact that occasionally I had to talk to guests, and that was something that I don't like doing. I just wanted to work on my own. I didn't want to deal with people. I just wanted to do my job. And I didn't like that was part of the job. So that was another example of a job that I quickly left. I got another one at what was it? Salvation Army, why am I blanking on the word? A thrift store. It was a thrift store, and my job was to go through the clothes and price them and sort them and hang them on the racks out in the store. And I thought that would be fine for me, because I didn't have to answer the phone. I didn't have to deal with kids. I didn't have to clean. All of the things that I hated about my past jobs, this one seemed like it would fit, so I took it. And I quickly learned that I could only handle so much of being in a store without being overly stimulated by the lights, the noises, the people. It was another example of that again. I mean, they had a radio on that played horrible music. It was Christian music, which is like it's one of my least favorite. I don't like it at all. It's not even a least favorite. It's a less than least favorite. I had to listen to that all day. I had to answer customers' questions when they couldn't find things, or if they didn't know something they wanted to know. And, all I wanted to do was price the clothes and sort them and put them on the racks. I didn't want to deal with all of these customers, just too many people. This is where I learned that I really hated being in a store. And this was also when I started to not be able to go shopping on my own during the busy times of the day. I started thinking, I can't be in a busy store. It's just too much, especially after I worked in that store. So I tried to make it last because I couldn't find anything else. But the thing was, then they tried to force me to work the cash register. And I told them I didn't have any good luck with this last time. And they trained me in anyway, and I said, I'm going to look for another job if I'm going to have to do this. And then, one day I had to answer the phone, and I'm like, nope, this is it. This is too much of what I didn't sign up for. Not doing it. I looked for another job. And so at this time I was living with my mom, because I couldn't afford my own place since these jobs were not full-time. They were not good pay. So I had to live with my mom, and that was horrible too. That caused me a lot of depression. I mean, because by this time I was in my 30s, and that's not a good time to be living with your mom. So I found a job where I could live and work at the same place. And it was in it was like a makeshift building that was temporary, but it was like a bunch of trailers put together, and the people would sleep in a room in the trailer. There were bedrooms in them, and then we would work in one of the other trailers that had a kitchen in it. So it was a kitchen job, and it was so I had this job for about 2 years, and I also had a lot of problems with this one too. But the reason why I kept it was because I didn't have to deal with living with my mom for most of the time, because I would drive there and I would work there for 6 weeks straight and then I would go home for 2 weeks and go back for 6 weeks. So it was like I could deal with living with my mom if I only had to be there for a while. So I would go to work and live there. But this was a job that I actually did enjoy doing, and I was working in the back of the kitchen. So there were times where I did have to deal with the customers, which sucked, but 90% of the time I was able to work in the back, chopping fruits and vegetables and slicing meat and cheese. And I really liked that job because most of the time it was just on my own. I was able to listen to music, and that was fine, great and everything. The only problems, there was a lot of problems with this job too. I had to work 12 hours a day, and this was 12 hours a day for 6 weeks in a row. So this was just like a recipe for burnout. And this was when I started to feel burnout. I worked so much that, I had the 2 weeks off, but I spent so much of those 2 weeks just traveling to get to that place and home because it was in another state away from me. So I had this job, and I stuck it out because it was really good money. I was able to save a lot of money because I wasn't paying my mom a whole lot of money in rent. And I'm like, okay, I can save up a lot of money if I just can stick with this job. I liked the actual job as long as I didn't have to deal with customers too much. And then the longer I worked there, the more I was, they hired new people to work with the customers, and I didn't have to do that as much. So towards the end, I was pretty happy, except for when they started to treat me like shit. So this is what they did. The first thing they did was they tried to switch my hours to be the complete opposite hours. So I was working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., which worked for me because I was a night owl. I could stay up all night and sleep all day. It was fine. But then they said you have to work the mornings 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And I told them I can't do that because I have never been able to get up in the morning. I think I have some sleep disorder because at the time I had heard of delayed sleep phase syndrome, and I was sure that I had it, but I didn't actually get tested for it or anything. So I told them this, and they didn't care. They said, just do it. They didn't care at all. They did not care how they treated me. So the first night I didn't get any sleep at all, of course, because I was so used to being up all night that I couldn't sleep at night. So I went into work and I felt like crap, and I started to fail at my job because I was so tired. That first week, I might have slept maybe an hour or two the second night, and maybe an hour, 2 or 3 hours the next night after that, and it just built up. I still was not able to sleep a full night's sleep. Even 6 or 7 hours I couldn't get. So after a week of this, on top of working 12 hours a day, which is hard enough even if you get enough sleep. So after a week of that, I woke up one of the days and I felt so sick that I was dizzy. I really couldn't hardly function. So much sleep deprivation. Like somebody could talk to me and I wouldn't comprehend what they were saying. I wasn't able to do my job correctly. And one of the days that got so bad, I started to have a meltdown, which is another thing in autism. It was all just too much. I just went to the back of the kitchen and I sat down and I started to cry. And my boss followed me back there and he's all like, "There's no crying at this job," which only made it worse. I couldn't control myself and I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. I was shaking. I was dizzy. I was crying. I said, "I can't sleep. I just can't sleep, and I can't work if I can't sleep. I'm telling you, there's something wrong." And so the next morning, I don't remember the exact order of how this went, but I had somebody drive me to the clinic to get a doctor's note because I was unable to work. And all they did for me was they took my blood pressure and they said it was high. And I'm like, well, no shit. I can't sleep. I'm stressed out. I'm on the wrong shift for my body. And I just don't know what to do. my bosses are not helping me at all. And then they gave me some stupid, useless sleeping pills. Didn't work at all. I slept nothing with them. I think Ambien was one of them. And Ambien is usually one of those pills that causes hallucinations and bad things happen. But for me, nothing. I felt completely the same. I didn't sleep at all. So luckily, I was able to go see a sleep therapist that same week because it happened to be the week that I was finally able to go home. And I went to see a sleep specialist, and yeah, I have this sleep disorder. I've had it my whole life, and I knew it. And so I took my paperwork back, the note from my doctor, and I took it back to work, and I said, here you go. I get to work back on my nighttime hours again. And they're like, okay, I guess this is what we have to do for you. And I'm like, yeah, okay, thanks fucking lot, because they did not help me at all. They would not have helped me if it weren't for that doctor's note. Ugh. So I did that, went back to my hours, and then what happened after that was they decided to sign a contract with the government where they needed people to work at one of these other locations, in a government location, like a army base or some sort of thing, something about the government. I don't remember now what it was. But basically, they could basically force us to transfer to this new location. And this new location was from one end of the country to the other. I mean, it would have taken me like 3 days just to drive there. And so they told me if I did not transfer to this new position, this new location, I would be fired. And I'm like, okay, so you want me to drive across the country tonight in a snowstorm? There was a snowstorm happening at the time. And they're like, you don't have to drive, we'll pay for your plane ticket. And I'm like, okay, so I have all of my belongings in this room, and I have no way of bringing them with me. I have no way of getting them home. I have to hop on a plane right now, and I have to drive to the airport in a blizzard. I'm not doing that. So basically, they fired me, and I had to sign a paper saying that I was willingly fired because I chose not to be transferred. Well, tell me, who would be able, even a non-autistic person, who would be able to just drop everything and drive across the country in a snowstorm that very same night? Or hop on a plane, not being able to bring all your belongings with you. This location would have still been the same on and off hours that I had. But I would have had to drive home across country every 2 weeks. No, I can't believe they thought that I would do that. And I was not the only person that they were trying to force to do this. Other people actually did it, but they were people that flew to work anyway because they lived in other states. And some of them even lived in this new location, so it was no problem for them. But for me, it was a huge disruption to my life, which, to an autistic person is the absolute worst. You just don't change their routine like that and just tell them, everything, your whole entire life is changing and you're forced to do it. This is not what I signed up for. So I got fired, and I was able to get a hotel and ride out the blizzard. I wasn't going to drive home in that. And I went home, and so the good thing that came out of that was I did get that diagnosis of delayed sleep phase disorder, which is a common thing with autism. People that have autism have problems sleeping, and this is one of the big reasons why. And this is a disorder where our bodies do not shift into the right mode of sleeping for a couple of hours after they're supposed to. So at night, we don't get tired until like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, anywhere from there on out. And then in the mornings, we can't function, can't get up. This is how I was throughout high school and grade school as well. My parents had to drag me out of bed and dress me, and I couldn't I couldn't function. So yeah, this is a thing. If you are autistic and you have sleep issues, you probably have delayed sleep phase disorder or insomnia, something that keeps you from sleeping. And a lot of it is because our minds just don't shut off. It takes a whole lot longer for our minds to shut off. And also, like I said, sleeping pills don't work on us. I've tried so many sleeping pills. In fact, I took two or three sleeping pills one time, and I was wide awake the whole entire night. In fact, I even ended up going somewhere because I wasn't tired and I had somewhere to go, so it didn't work at all. They've never worked for me. And so you might find that that's true for you as well. If you have sleep problems, that sleeping pills just don't work for you. All right, so picking up back with my story, after I got fired, I did actually have a good chunk of money saved up, and that was the other good thing that came out of that job. I had enough money to buy a mobile home, and so I bought a mobile home for $5,000. It was an old, shitty one, and I'm still living in it, so that definitely paid off. So yeah, I had to move to another town though, but it's fine because I didn't want to live with my mom anymore anyway. The town that my mom lived in was really expensive to live in. I couldn't afford it, so I moved to this other town that's a lot cheaper. So where I'm living now, I can afford to barely work. So yeah, I have this mobile home now that's that I bought with that money, and I did have more money than that too, but I used that money to fix it up and buy myself like 2 weeks of time in between to find another job, which I knew was going to be a struggle. You know, actually, I'm skipping a job. I do remember that there was another one that I took before this, and it was another factory, and I hated it, and the bosses were horrible there too. And that's another thing. Like, when you combine social issues with sensory issues and work issues, all of them together, that's the worst combination. And so these jobs that I had where I hated the environment, I hated the job, I hated the bosses, it was just all bad things in one. And so, yeah, I didn't stay at that job long either, a couple months. And that's when I moved here. So I moved here, and I kind of was forced to take one of the first jobs that I could get, because at the time I'm like, oh, I don't want to run out of money. So I worked at a hotel. This is one of the worst jobs I've ever had in my life. And I thought all these ones leading up to this one were bad. So this one was, oh, I'm cringing right now, and I'm holding my head, and I just can't believe how bad this was. It was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life that I had at this job. So I signed up for the, well, I applied for this job where I was working laundry, and I also had to work the front desk. And I thought that the front desk was gonna suck, but I thought, maybe they'll eventually put me in just the laundry, and I'll try. It was the only thing I could get at the time. So I loved working in the laundry. That was great. But then the front desk stuff was an absolute disaster. It was so bad that the managers had to drive back to work to help me when I was there by myself with somebody that was checking in, and I couldn't figure something out. I bet you there was probably 3 or 4 times where I had to call the manager and say, I need you to come in and do this because I can't do this. So that happened a couple times. And another embarrassing thing was, after all that happened, the head manager said, okay, we're going to train you in right. We're going to make sure that you can do all this. And so he stood there and pretended that he was a customer. Not a customer. What do you call people that stay at hotels? A client? A visitor? I'm forgetting the word. But anyway, they came, there was a calling to make a reservation. He was pretending to be a person, and I was having so much trouble with the phone system and the computer. The computer system was absolutely a nightmare. I couldn't do it. I was, like, we were on the phone, and he goes, so just pretend that I'm somebody trying to make a reservation, and here's my information. And I was like, yeah, I'm trying. I don't know. He was asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know the answer to the question. I just don't know. I can't figure this out. I I just kept saying that, and he didn't help me. He just sat there and waited for me to figure it out, and I never figured it out. And there were people coming in and out and listening to it, and it was so embarrassing. And like, I don't know why he thought I could get it. I told him I was never able to work a cash register before. I got kicked off of the cash register. This is basically the same thing. And it's just, numbers and the phone and people. When I had my autism diagnosis, they said that I did not have a learning disability, but I feel like that's not true because other people would have been able to figure this out, but I couldn't. There was a block there. There was just a wall where I just couldn't get past it. I didn't understand what I was supposed to do. Nothing was making sense that he was saying. So I don't even remember how that situation panned out. I think I just said, I didn't even tell him that I was going to get another job, but I was looking for another job the whole time. So I finally got another job. It was such a good feeling leaving that job for the last time. I said, I'm never working in a hotel again unless I can work in just laundry. So then the next job that I got was at Target, which is a retail store. And I assumed that I was going to be doing the same type of job that I did at the thrift store. And that was working with the clothes. I was sorting the clothes and hanging them up, cleaning out the changing rooms, and maybe stocking shelves and helping those people stock the shelves and arranging everything for the night for closing. All that sounded great, except for, I didn't really like the idea of being in a store again because it was bright lights, customers. Ugh. So, but the plus was the area that I was working in was carpeted because it was the women's clothing section. It was carpeted, so carpeting is just a comforting thing for me. It's one of those sensory things where I like to walk on soft, quiet ground. I don't want to be on this slippery, hard, surface that bounces sounds off of it. I liked being in the carpeted, soft area. Which, that was fine until I found out, again, that it was my job to answer the phone. I don't understand why it was my job to answer the phone out of, 100 employees. How did I get this unlucky again that I had to answer the phone here, too? So, I'm like, I don't do well with phones. This ain't probably not gonna work. So, I did it for a couple months, and it was so stressful. A lot of times when I answered the phone, it was a customer asking, do you have a certain item? I'd have to run around across the store to areas that weren't even mine, to sections that I was not familiar with. Oh, this should have been hard for anybody, but for an autistic person, it was an absolute disaster. I couldn't find things. I'm asking people for help. I'm like, this person on the phone needs to know where this thing is, and I don't know where it is. This isn't my section. And so I was, eventually I don't even know if these were called meltdowns, but I had a lot of moments where I had to just go hide in the dressing rooms because I just needed to get away from the people and the lights. And I was like, please don't let the phone ring while I'm in here, because I probably would have gotten fired if I would have, they had this rule that you have to answer the phone after 3 rings. So I escaped to the dressing room, and I just sat in there and just had to sit in there and do nothing. It was just, and so the whole time I worked there, I was looking for another job. And this whole thing started again. This is a pattern. It's like a cycle. Just shitty job after shitty job. And I'm trying to escape every job. And a couple months later, the next thing happened again. So the next job that I got was at a casino. And, well, no, wait, never mind. It was a factory. It was another factory, but this factory was... The job itself that I was doing wasn't so bad because I was in a smaller room and I was only working with myself or one other person, which was fine. And the bad part about that job was they had mandatory overtime, so I would be forced to come in on my weekends most of the time, which didn't, by this time I had started going to music festivals, which I mentioned earlier is one of my special interests. It's like my thing in life. Like, this is what I live for. So I was going to music festivals on weekends, but then this job started making us work mandatory overtime at weekends, and I had to miss festivals. And some other parts about the job that sucked was, of course, it's a factory, so it's loud and bright. And there was actually one job where, well, there was a couple that I had to answer a phone, even though it wasn't customers, it was other workers that needed something. And I didn't like that either, of course. So I was looking for another job again. And that's when I went to the casino, but this wasn't in the casino, it was in the laundry. I was in the hotel part of the casino, so I was doing laundry, and I thought, okay, finally, a laundry job only. I don't have to deal with customers, I don't have to deal with cash registers. Let's hope this works. So at first I loved it. I'm like, yep, I can handle this. I was in a small laundry room with some other women, but it wasn't super stressful or loud, or it was fine. The only problem was I had issues with a person, and this is another autistic thing. This other person was on vacation when I started, and I didn't know her until she came back. And then when she came back, I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. Hey, okay, whatever. I quickly learned that she didn't like me, and she started to pick on me. She started to make everything my fault and make me do the jobs that she did not want to do. So in this laundry room, we're supposed to rotate around to the positions. But she somehow just thought she deserved to do the easiest job there, which we were all supposed to rotate to. So she did that like 90% of the time, and I didn't hardly ever get to do it. And she would make me do all the hard stuff. And I realized that this is not fair. And then one time we got into like a confrontation, and autistic people hate confrontations. So I just didn't know how to handle it. And she was just a witch with a B. I can say bitch. I've already said the F word anyway. So she was a bitch, and she made my life hell there. And another thing that sucked was, when you're working in a hotel, you are around so many people. Like, there were probably thousands of people coming in and out of that hotel every day. And I was the one that was cleaning their dirty bed sheets. So, yeah, we had gloves, but, this was back before COVID, so there was no such thing as masks. People just didn't think of it, I guess. So all these disgusting bed sheets are coming down the chute, and this is so friggin' gross, but like, I was standing there trying to sort them while they're coming down the chute, and a big giant pile would come down really fast and land on your head. It would literally land on your head. I had dirty linens falling on me for 8 hours a day. And eventually, of course, I ended up getting sick a lot. I got sick more there than I did anywhere else at any of my other jobs. In my life, I've never been sick this much in my life. I would just get like colds, and I also would get like, throw up. And I don't know if this was from the disgusting environment, but whatever, I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it no more. Between this bitch and the laundry being disgusting, falling on my head, I couldn't handle it. Other than that, the job was fine. I like folding clothes. I like folding laundry. I like delivering them to the different floors and putting them where they belong. But this other stuff was not doable. So again, here I am looking for another job. The next job that I got was at another factory because I really had to get out of that hotel fast. And so another factory that I knew was going to be awful. I just knew it because they all are. So this was a really bright, loud factory like all of them. And the worst part about this, there were two really bad things about this job. The other one was the mandatory overtime, which again was like the other factory where we had to work weekends, but also it got worse than that. Also, we'd go into work during the week and they would just say, you have to work overtime tomorrow. 2 extra hours on top of your 10 hours. Okay, so 12 hours during the week and on the weekend. So there goes my festivals, there goes all my free time. And I'm in a bright environment where this was really loud and bright. This was just insanely loud and bright. And even the lunchroom was loud and bright because all the people were in there talking. And it was just like, I don't want to be around people. I can't stand people. I can't stand these lights. So on my breaks, I used to inhale my food as quick as I can, and then I would go run and hide in the bathroom and sit in the bathroom for the rest of the break. Because at least, I found the darkest stall in the bathroom, so I had some, break from the bright lights. And I found a bathroom that was back in the middle of the building where nobody else was. It wasn't the main bathroom, so it was like I kind of felt like it was my own personal bathroom, even though there was a lot of times where somebody would come in. But I could deal with one person. But it still sucked because I was trying to escape from everything. So that was my sign that I had to start looking for another job because I just couldn't. I'm like, no more factories. I just can't. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was my boss. And I thought, I had those horrible bosses at that one kitchen where they didn't listen to me about my sleep issues and they fired me. This was even worse than that because this boss flat out singled me out and treated me like crap in front of everybody. Well, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's just as bad as them other ones. Just as bad as the one at the hotel that was like forcing me to figure out something I couldn't figure out. This boss was like cruel, like mean. She was like, she'd come up to me and she'd say stuff like, I thought I told you to do this. Why are you doing this instead? And she'd say it loud and she'd say it like she was my mother. And all the other people would hear it and look and watch, and so I had to explain to her why I did it the way I did. And I had a valid reason for doing it the way that I did. I wouldn't just defy what she said for no reason. But after I explained to her, she must have felt stupid and she just walked away. Like, okay, if this is what it's going to be like, she's the one that's okaying my time off. I don't want to deal with this woman, when she's going to be... And this was a regular occurrence. It wasn't just one time. It wasn't just 2 or 3 times. It was probably every other day. And I worked there for a year. And I just... I don't know how managers can just be so awful to their employees and expect them to stay there. And maybe neurotypical people can handle that a little bit better, but autistic people don't handle well confrontations and misunderstandings and people that treat them like crap. It just wasn't cool. And so I looked for another job. But what ended up happening was the reason why I was able to quit that job without having another job was because when my dad died a couple of years before this, I had a lot of money from when we sold his house. So I had a pretty large savings sitting there. I thought I was going to use it for my own house that I was going to buy someday. But that never happened because I couldn't take it no more. I was so burnt out on working all this overtime, dealing with all these people, these loud, bright environments, getting sick, and dealing with customers, being embarrassed, being treated like crap. It was all just too much. And my mental health was worse than it has ever been. So I quit without having another job lined up because I knew I had this money, and my goal was, after that, I was gonna start my own business online. I had some ideas of some stuff I wanted to do, and I'm like, I'm gonna do this thing myself. Screw work. And that's what I did. I started my online business, which this is about 3 years ago now, so I've had it for a couple years, and it's not a full-time income, but it's something. It's paying my rent. It's paying like one other bill besides my rent. So I mean, it's enough. But yeah, it's not. There's downfalls to it as well. I'm burnt out with this job as well. Well, I call it a job, but it's really just, my own side thing online. But I'm burnt out on this as well now, and I think it's just from sitting on a computer for 12 to 16 hours a day and busting my ass, working by myself, doing everything myself. So I started an Etsy shop, a blog, a YouTube channel, a podcast. I wrote a book and put it on Amazon. I've got a couple other like low content books on Amazon, which are like journals. And social media is all done myself. My email list is all done myself. So yeah, for 3 years I've been building my business, working on my computer every day, and that's causing a lot of problems too. Like my eyesight's getting worse, my wrist is hurting from using my typing all day and using my mouse all day, and and this is a recent thing that I got burnt out from. This is a couple months ago now. That was around the time that I got diagnosed with autism that I realized I simply can't handle jobs or business, something that I'm putting this much effort into, and it's not even a full-time income, and I'm burnt out. I'm just absolutely burnt out. My brain is mush. I can barely, I haven't even made any new products in these last couple months. And so that's around the time, like I said, I got diagnosed with autism, and then I'm like, okay, this is why I've struggled with work my whole life. This is why I'm even struggling with my business. I need to stop. I just need to stop. I'm still burnt out now. Just burnout. Overstimulation, mental health is going down the toilet. I've always had anxiety and depression on and off, but it's gotten 10 times worse since I've been burnt out of all these jobs. And then I started going to therapy. I started going to therapy around the time that I quit my first job, or not, the job that the last one, I should say. So I started going to therapy then, and that's around the time when she's like, well, if you just can't work, just see how this business goes. And that's when I started the business. But therapy was no help at all, because really therapists are just expensive friends to vent to. They don't have any good suggestions to help you. And she didn't know that I was autistic. I didn't know that I was autistic. So basically, she just acted as like bouncing ideas off me. Like, why don't you work part-time then? Because I can't afford it. Why don't you... she would just throw these things out there, and I'm like, no, that's not going to help because I have this problem or that problem. And then, I did see another therapist after her that was even worse, but basically just said the same stuff. Why don't you just work part-time then? Why don't you just try more jobs? Okay, because like the 15 jobs that I've had weren't enough indication that I can't handle it. I've tried working with customers. I've tried working in hotels. I've factories, so many factories, which is, the reason there's so many factories around here. That's like 90% of the jobs that are available, which is why that's mostly what I've done. But, so it's like, I just don't know what to do anymore. And right now, where I'm at with my business, it's like I'm so burnt out, but at the same time, I'm still getting money because it's stuff that I'm selling. It's stuff that's available on the internet to buy, which is like already done. So I don't have to actually keep making more things. I could, but like I'm too burnt out. I ran out of ideas. I have no motivation. It's a lot of work and energy and effort just to get through a day sometimes. So yeah, the mental issues. I have depression. It's generalized depression, although the guy that said that I have autism is also the guy that thinks that I have is it recurring? There's two different types of general depressive disorders. One of them is where it's happening now, and the other one is where it's basically been like your whole life. And I can't remember what the terms are, but he said that it's been my whole life. Like, so I've had that my whole life. I've had generalized anxiety disorder my whole life. And these are two things that are common with autism. And so it doesn't take much for me to get pushed over the edge and not be able to handle things. And this is, a lot of this is from masking, because autistic people have to blend in with the world in order to fit in. So we're pushing ourselves farther than we are able to go. We are working long hours. We are working in conditions that are not good for us. We are around too many people pretending we are normal, and this is what autistic burnout is. So it's like a combination of autistic burnout and job burnout and business burnout. It's all of it. And so I'm not doing a whole lot these days with my actual business. And when I found out that I was autistic, I'm like, okay, I need to learn all about autism so I can better learn myself and how to deal with life. And that's when I started this podcast. So I think I covered everything there. I don't think I missed any jobs. I might have missed one or two, but basically, if I missed a job, you can pretty much guarantee that it was the same outcome as the other ones. And just a lot of issues with the people, with the environment, burnout, all that. Just, ugh. So that's my history of work leading up to this moment right now. So I hope from hearing this episode, if you've listened to the whole thing, that you might feel a little less alone in how much you struggle with work, because most of us do, and it is not your fault. These issues were not my fault either. I didn't know I was autistic at all at any of these jobs. If I had known, I might have been able to tell them, and maybe they would have been forced to accommodate me somehow, but I don't think it would have helped at all, because the environments and the people were the problem. And you can't just stay at a job and not have the same environment and the same people. So I hope this episode was helpful for you, and thank you so much for listening. I know this was a long one, but it was a lot to talk about because work is the biggest issue of my life, and I think it's one of the biggest issues of most autistic people's lives as well. So thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.